everybody. I'm super excited to be here. Thank you all for coming, and thank you to everybody that's running the event and all the sponsors and everyone for being here. So this is styling in Reason, and we're gonna go over the overview of how to style with your, CSS stuff in Reason. And so my name is Raphael. On Discord, I'm Persian Turtle as well as GitHub, and on Twitter, I am Rafatpanah. So I work at Wayfair in Boston. I'm a front-end focused engineer, and we are hiring, so if anybody's interested, please reach out to me afterwards. And this is my 4.5-year-old. She's actually already a member of the community, the OCaml and Reason and BuckleScript community. She was at ReasonConf last year in Vienna. And so when I was joining, it was about early 2017, and I didn't really see a lot of stuff that targeted the web platform. I didn't see a lot of examples for web stuff. And so the way I learned is just diving in and see what happens. And I really wanted to do some stuff that really DOM focused, really manipulate the DOM and that kind of stuff. So I built 2 projects there on GitHub. The first one is a progressive web app, boilerplate app that has a router in it and route transitions and all kinds of nice things that people might want to use. And then the second one is just a 3D carousel for fun that just really, it's a lot of DOM stuff. And there's tutorials online on Medium, but they're a little bit out of date. So the code is up to date, but the tutorials are not. And so I did also write a book trying to get people, to make people, an easy way to get started with the web platform. And so at work at Wayfair, I'm running these learning sessions. It's been going on for about 3 months now. And what we do is, we take some core components that are written in React.js. We are a React.js shop. And we just see what it feels like to rewrite them in Reason with a group of people. And nobody in the room really knows much about Reason. And so we just work through all the problems as they come across. And these are recorded, they have video, and they're also summarized, and they're on my GitHub if anyone wants to take a look and see what's going on. So, early 2017, I was really into React, and I also understood I see the future that Reason gives us, and I wanted to go in there. And as a newcomer, I was, like many people in the React.js community, was really into style components. And so I want to give a little bit of overview of what style components is. And so here we're just creating a React component using the style components API. And so first line over there is we're creating a wrapper element, and it's the result of a function call, style.div, and we're going to somehow pass some CSS into this component. And somehow is actually the way we're doing it is called a tagged template literal, and that's a feature of JavaScript. So we're actually using a very Sass-like syntax, very CSS-like syntax, and we're also accessing the props and dynamically rendering the CSS based on what the props are. Let's go through that. And then to use it, it's just a very normal usage. It's just a component, it's got props, you can just pass them. And so what are some of the pros of this approach? Well, so syntax matters as we learned. It's very Sass-like. Style components is one of the most popular CSS and JS libraries that exist today. I think because of syntax, it makes it so easy to use. People that don't have to learn something totally new. It's very straightforward. Also, you get some nice performance benefit. There's the CSS in the document in the browser is only going to you're not going to get extra CSS. Only the stuff that is being rendered to the page is going to have CSS in the head of the document. So you don't have to have things like extra styles that are not going to be used, just taking up space. You get the scope styles for free. You don't have any risk of, if I have a title class or something like that, and I use that somewhere else, you're not going to risk that you override some class. And also, since they're components, if you use them, you use styles. If you delete them from your library, you can safely delete them. You don't have to worry that maybe somewhere else in your app you're using some CSS and you shouldn't delete it. And this is a big one for me. There's no active class, right? So if you're using a Sass kind of thing, the different states of your component is going to have different classes and like different modifiers, and you're going to keep all that stuff in your CSS, but you don't have to worry about that here. You just use props and you render the CSS for the current state. So yeah, so back to the being a newcomer to the Reason world. A lot of people have this question of, can I use style components in Reason? Like, let's read a couple of them. Like, is there a style components analog for Reason? Is there any concept of style components for Reason? It's the same question over and over again. There's much more than this, and that was one of them. And so the answers that we get, I think, today are, one, sure, we can write style components in JavaScript, and then we can bind to that component in Reason, right? That's one answer. No, you can't do it, just use Sass. And lastly, no, just maybe use another CSS Reason library like BSCSS or BSEmotion, right? So we're going to go through each of these things and see what they actually look like in practice. So first of all, let's say we have some style component written in JavaScript already. Here's how we can bind to it, right? So we have a BS module decorator, and we're passing in the path for our JavaScript file. And this is going to be used to compile to like an import statement or a require statement, depends on what your module format is. And then we use the React component decorator to make this a Reason React component with the make props and the make function. So this is our external make function, and we're going to pass some props to it. We're passing a primary, an optional primary prop, where it's going to be a true or false, or just true or maybe nothing. And some on-click handler, and we're passing children, and a ref as well. And this is going to return a React element, and the default string over here just means that we're going to bind to the default export. So default export. And then to use this, we just use it like a normal React component, as if we had written it in Reason, which is what we expect, right? So some pros of this approach is that we can reuse the existing style components. Like if there's a large code base that we have and we want to switch over to Reason, we can incrementally do this. We don't have to rewrite all of that stuff inside of some other paradigm, which is really great. And of course, you get all the benefits of style components, like the way you write style components, and you don't have to have automate all that stuff we talked about earlier. But some of the cons is that we need to maintain 2 files for every style component. So assuming that props will change, let's say for some reason, we want to add another prop, then we need to do this in 2 places. And it's not ideal. And for some reason that I can't explain, it just feels like a bit of a hack. Like maybe we shouldn't do it. Like maybe that's not the right answer. So let's look at using Sass. So we firstly import some Sass file, and this is going to be useful for when we're using Webpack or some kind of like JS bundler. It's going to require this file, you're going to import the file. You can use like a raw import statement. You can use a require statement. You can bind to a require function and then use that. There's a lot of ways you can do it. And then eventually you're just going to use some class name, and this class name will be coming from that CSS. They're not like linked in some way. We're just importing this file and then using some class. And so some pros about this approach is that it's simple and awesome. Like Sass has been around for a long time, and it's pretty awesome. And you can also reuse a lot. There's a lot of existing code that uses Sass, and you can reuse all that too. And people who have used Sass until now have avoided a lot of churn in the CSS world. It's probably been a good choice. And some cons. Not many. like Sass is actually a pretty good choice. So let's look at BSCSS. Maybe a lot of people haven't dived into this that much. So this is what it looks like. We have a module that we're calling styles over here, and this is just something that we call. And once we install the BSCSS dependency, we get this CSS module, and we're just going to open it. And what that does is give us functions like style. So we have a binding called wrapper, and we're going to call this style function that we get from CSS. and it's going to accept a list of rules. And each rule is going to be like some CSS property. So we're setting display flex over here, but we're doing that as a result of a function call. So display is a function, and we're passing in this value flexbox. Okay, it's a little bit new. And to do the nesting, like the SAS style nesting, we have another function that is, it's called selector. And the first argument is going to be a string, which is the selector that we're trying to target. And then we're going to pass in a array, a list of rules again. So here we're saying color is red, and we're calling the color function and passing in the red value. And we can also use the ampersand syntax that we use with SAS as well. And to use it, we're just going to add a class name. So that's styles module with that wrapper binding, we're just going to access it directly. And the reason this works is because BSCSS is just bindings to emotion, which is another popular JS, CSS and JS library. And that will generate a class name for us. And yeah, so BSCSS is just like a statically typed domain-specific language for emotion. We can also do things like pseudo-elements, and pseudo-elements are like an after function. And other cool things like transition is a function that accepts some labeled arguments. So a little bit nice API right there. You know, duration is 400 and timing function is ease. As well as media queries, you know, the same idea. The first argument is a string, and the second argument is a list of rules. So some pros about this. It makes it really a lot harder to write invalid styles. So you can't say something like color 4 pixels or something like that that just wouldn't compile. All of that stuff is like type checked, right? So it's statically typed, and you get a lot of guarantees. And you get some, as a result, you know, since it's all values and stuff, you get some nice autocomplete, and you get some nice IntelliSense as well. And there's no need for raw JavaScript. Something cool too is that you can merge styles. So if you have 2 different styles and you want to merge them, or 3 or 4 or whatever, they will be merged in order. They'll preserve the order, and the output will be efficient. So let's say you have 3 different rules that you're trying to, like 3 different classes that you're trying to merge, and each of them have a color field, like color property. It's only going to keep the last one, right? So it will not like output all the unnecessary stuff that will get overridden in CSS. It's going to just output what's the most efficient. And you know, if there's some new CSS features that are not yet supported in the library, you have escape hatches to do whatever you need to do. And some cons is that the syntax is like, you know, quite different than CSS. And I think this is like a big barrier to entry for a lot of people who are in the React.js world using style components. And you know, they're looking at this and saying, that's a little bit weird and a little bit new, and maybe one more hurdle for me to jump through. And no, you really need to have an understanding of like OCaml's type system and like the OCaml world already to be useful in this. You know, if you're not familiar, if you're not comfortable looking at like an interface file, it's going to be a little bit hard to understand how to use the library, in my opinion. And you know, it generates class names instead of components. Like you don't get that that nice benefit of you just using a component. You have to use a DOM node and pass a class, which to me is a little bit, you know, it's a con for me. And so like this is what we just talked about right now, like the existing options that we have. You know, that's what I think there. That's the my opinion. And again, like I think this is like a barrier to entry for a lot of people. Like that's the motivation for the talk, is like maybe we can come up with some way a little bit better to give people a nice smoother answer. And actually, just until recently, I had like a harder answer, and after Ricky Vetta's talk earlier, like made this a little bit simpler. Which thank you for that. Yeah, so earlier I wanted to understand like what was the problem? Like why can't we use style components in Reason directly? Like what was the hurdle? And for me, after trying to do it, in my opinion, the challenge is that in JSX, you know, you have lowercase tag names are considered to be HTML tags, or components or something. So if you use JSX with lowercase value, it's not gonna, like how can you make that work, right? And then bindings, like if you're saying external something or let something, they're always lowercase. You can't make them uppercase. And so like an example of this is, let's say we have some component over here, it's going to be lowercase. Like, how can we use this in JSX? And so let's take a step back and just look at something interesting in Reason. So when we have a capital component in JSX, just like the way it is, that's going to de-sugar to component.make and component.make props. So this is like when you're using that React.component decorator, it's going to create the make props function for you, and you define your make function. But when you use another binding on this module, it will call that function, and then it will call something of the same name with the props appended to it. So what does that give us? So let's see what we can do. So I don't think this will play yet. So yeah, I just made this video like about an hour ago, and I still haven't had time to render. So let's go see if we can do that another way. Is it here? No. Give me 1 second. Is this QuickTime? Yeah. Alrighty. So let's take a look. So here we have a component, and it's a normal component right now. Like, we have this binding over here, but it's not really doing anything right now. So let's go ahead and remove the normal stuff and see if we can use our binded component directly. And so what we do is we create our own component props, and we're going to just use this directly. We're not going to use the React component decorator. We're going to just create our own directly. And so it takes a children's prop, and unit is necessary because this is a labeled argument, only one labeled argument. And so then we want to just create a React, like a JS object here. And if we do that, we have to change the implementation to use the dot component here. And that could be whatever value that we want, if we can change it both places. And if we do that, it will render something as a style component, which is pretty cool. So let's see how we can add a primary prop that is optional. Or maybe the false, I'm not sure what I did. Yeah, it's an optional Boolean. And then we can use this in the it's just the JavaScript syntax, exactly the same API as we're used to in JavaScript, in React.js. So we're passing the props, we're accessing the, checking to see if it exists, very not safely. And then we're just calling a CSS function to append some more CSS if that prop is existing. Yeah, so that's that video. Let's see how we can go back to. One second. I wonder where my other thing went. That's not what I want. Here we go. Cool. Yeah, so I was super excited. If anyone wants to know, before what I was doing was just unwrapping the JSX myself and calling React.createElement variadic directly. And this is way better what's here. So that's super awesome. So some pros to this approach is that we have one file to maintain for each style component, which I think is a nice thing. We also don't have to leave our Reason environment. We don't have to create JS files, even though we're using raw JavaScript inside of our Reason. It still is it's a little bit easier in my opinion. It's not terribly verbose. Maybe there's some way to even get better than this. Who knows? And for me, the main thing is that it gives newcomers a way to say, hey, can I do style components in Reason? Sure. Here's how you do it. Cons, it's still very new. I would love to hear people's ideas and thoughts about this, because I think it's important to make this a very, very easy, smooth onboarding experience, especially for front-end developers, because I think it matters a lot. And so I have this in the app show I showed earlier. Like I have 3 different branches, and it's one for each like version of this. And so like the existing code shows the old way of doing it. I'll have to update that soon, but you can check that out later if you want to compare and contrast different things. And special thanks to Ricky, because like holy crap, that's amazing. I'm so excited. And Ben as well for helping with this too. Adam Cole is a friend of mine who helped come up with this idea of using static components using BS Raw. And Yawar and Quad, they also helped me a lot when I was getting started, and super awesome, thankful for that. And Peter and everybody in the conference and all the sponsors and everybody for running this has been amazing so far. And all of you for listening.